All right, so in the last one, I kind of got the problem, I guess you could call it. Now I'm going to talk about the discretionary fiscal policy a little more. Um, well, again, I talked about why they would do it. So you have a change in aggregate demand, and they're trying to pick aggregate demand back up to put it back onto its long run aggregate supply, this is called full employment. So this is where everybody who wants a job has a job, or at least has quick access to a job. There are a lot of people that want a job, but they quit their other job and they're waiting for, it's called there's four different types of employment. There's cyclical, this would be cyclical unemployment because you have the business cycle, so these ups and downs in the economy. You have structural, people lacking actual skills, and then you have the people that you're seasonal, and this is the one that people just decide, like, I don't like my job, I would like something else, right? So that's a natural unemployment, and in a good economy, within a month, almost everybody that quits their one job can go find another job. And in fact, you can look at a leading indicator of whether or not you think the economy is doing well by how many people are quitting their jobs. So if you have a high quit rate, that means people are pretty confident that the economy is doing well and they'll be able to go find another job. Whereas during a recession, nobody quits their job because they realize, like, I hate my job, but I would rather have my job than no job. And my other option is no job, given that the economy is terrible, right? So, what are some of the possible offsets? So let's say the economy takes a dip and government comes in and it decides to stimulate. So what could be an offset? That is, government is trying to get the economy back to here, so it comes in with, let's say, a tax cut, right? So it reduces people's taxes, take-home pay goes up, and the idea is they would take that money and they would go spend it. It depends, the effect, I think, would depend on how it's done. So there are a couple ways they can do it. One, they can do it the Bush stimulus tax check, which means people just get a check in the mail. And the idea is the government wants them to go buy it. But there are problems with that. Number one is they want them to go up and blow $600, right? What are you going to blow? You blow it on a TV or something? Stuff that you blow it on like that is probably made overseas. So how are you going to stimulate the US economy by spending more money overseas, by sending more money to a foreign country? Well, the salesman gets a little bit, but so you might have a small increase, but if you look at what happened, the actual historical chart, there was basically during that, they call it disposable income, that is money that you have after taxes and stuff, and so disposable income shot up like this during that one period where you had the $300 and $600 checks, but actual expenditures were pretty flat. Okay? So I don't remember exactly what it looked like, but there was no discernible difference in actual individual consumption levels. So basically the check did nothing. It was billion dollars that they sent out to Americans, right? $600 billion, million dollars. It had to be billion because 600 billion is nothing, right? I mean, the government spent that in the last half a second. Government spends $600 million every 30 seconds. I think it was, yeah, something like that. Very quickly. So it was in the hundreds of billions, and it didn't have any effect. And what that meant is the other offset, there are a couple offsets with that. So let me get to the tax reduction. So if you think about what's going on here, we're in a recession, right? People are worried about the future, and people are like, oh, the economy is not good. And so if they get more money, why wouldn't they go spend it? Well, they'll probably pay off credit card debt with the hopes they can reduce their credit card debt and then rack up the credit card debt later. That allows them a little more flexibility in their credit. So, if people don't have a job, then and if people don't have a job, they're not going to go, oh, well, $600, let me go to Vegas or something like that, right? That would be really stupid. And so people don't do that. People don't say, oh, I don't have a job, but I got this $600 check in the mail, so I'm gonna go buy a brand new TV. Some people do, not smart, right? I think everybody realizes that's pretty dumb. And the basic idea there is that if you're in a recession, people are a little concerned and they don't have a lot of disposable income. So the smart thing to do, everybody realizes, is to save that money somehow. And again, you can pay off debt with it, which means you have lower monthly payments on your credit card. You can rack up, it allows you to add that debt back on later if you need it. So there's a lot of issues there, why people don't spend it. People are concerned, basically. Other things so again, I was kind of saying that it depends on how it's done. If people don't notice it, so I thought Obama's stimulus was the same thing, but what he did is he cut the payroll taxes, and the complaint was, oh, it's only $13 a week. But if people think, oh, I've got a little more take-home pay, maybe we can go out to eat extra, but they don't think in terms of a one-time check. So if it's considered a longer-term thing, like lower taxes, so people are keeping more of the money, then it's possible that they will spend that money, go out to eat. But the big problem with tax rebates, like big tax mailing out checks, is everybody knows this is just one time. So if you think of foreign aid, so there are, in America, welfare is known to cause a lot of problems. It actually helps sustain poverty, kind of that's it. Government programs often are self-sustaining. They want to grow, and so the more, getting people off welfare is not good for the welfare department. And so what it does is it kind of gets people hooked with this idea that they're gonna get this check every week, right? But they look at some charity programs where they tell the people, this is just one time. We're gonna give you this one check. You're not gonna get it again. People will spend that more wisely. And so I think you see this with tax rebates, is a one-time check. People, in a bad times, people realize that this is a one-time check. I'm not gonna get this again next month, next year, whatever. So I have to spend this wisely. Whereas if they get a tax deduction, it's more of a longer term, and so they're more likely to spend that money. And so, when he was president, Barack Obama, he increased payroll. He gave a payroll deduction. It was kind of temporary, but it was, they said to average something like 13 a week. So again, it's not a lot of money, but it is a meal. It is an extra going out to eat one more time. So people thinking that it's a longer term issue are probably more likely to go and spend it. So it really depends on how you do it, but those are some of the offsets, okay? And if you look at the Freakonomics paper on the basketball team, it was, well, I know one was the crowding out effect, and so that is part of that is against monetary policy. I was actually talking to a friend of mine who's in a different class at this school I'm at right now, and the crowding out effect is it's both a fiscal and a monetary. So government, but not necessarily with tax cuts. So come to that. The crowding out effect is government wants to borrow more money. So getting back to this, where does the government get that $600 billion? Well, it's got to borrow the money, because clearly the government doesn't have $600 billion sitting around, right? I mean, they got $20 trillion in debt. You think they got $600 billion in cash just laying there? No, so they're gonna have to get that money somewhere else, right? And so if they issue a tax stimulus, they have to borrow the money. How are they gonna borrow the money? Well, they're gonna go into the market. Now, let's ignore the Federal Reserve right now, just for a moment. But if they're gonna borrow the money from the public, basically, let's pretend there's a pool of loanable funds, right? And so here's government, here's private sector. So government borrows money. Now the government needs to get more money. where's it gonna get it? If you have a set amount of loanable funds that are sitting out there, or maybe you have some more funds that are accessible, but people are not yet willing to loan them out. So government is gonna have to do something, but generally you would say government is going to borrow more money, increase that number of pool of funds, it has to raise the interest rate. Okay? And so what that does is, if the loanable funds is fixed, let's say the funds that are going to be loaned this year, okay? So it's gonna crowd out private investment, right? And so government spends more money, or, it kicks back to consumption, but what that does is it lowers the private investment, because there's less private investment at a higher interest rate, right? So it tends to crowd out private investment. If you have this set, and when government increases the interest rate, it could entice more people to loan money. So let's say it doesn't crowd out private investment, that they still get theirs, but the government is trying to get more money, so it has to entice these people to borrow. Let's say people are like, oh, we're good citizens, we won't loan money to the government, Japan, right? So they're very willing to give the government money, and so what does that do? Well, if the government's going to borrow money to give the stimulus check, that basically means this person that gets the $600 check is going to he's going to go, oh, government wants to borrow money from me, I'm going to give him $600. So their income goes, or their disposable income goes down by $600, and that money goes to government, and then the government kicks it back in the form of a $600 check. And so their income goes back up, and they're basically even. They don't have any excess money, right? And so whatever the case, it's likely to be crowded out. So that's the crowding out. And that's because what that does is, again, it raises the interest rate, so reduces private investment, and it could also reduce the amount of disposable income that people have after taxes and after everything else, right? After they loan the money they invest, they decide to invest more money. And again, I think the big issue here is it's a recession. So a wise, rational person says, I'm trying to do what's best for my family, and blowing money on a vacation in a recession is not a good idea, right? So that's one offset, and the example there is that, they went to China and they said, in China in 2008, you had the Olympics, and they thought, oh, the Olympics, we're going to spend a lot of money, and we're going to, China didn't really do it for monetary purposes. They did it, obviously the Olympics are a political thing, but from the national standpoint. So what they did is they spent $40 billion, I think, on their 2008 Summer Olympics, and they thought, a lot of the Olympics always says, hey, you'll increase tourism stuff. I mean, look at a football stadium or something. Oh, you'll have this football team, and you have massive economic development around the stadium and stuff. And it never happens, because a football stadium is 10 games a year, right? Maybe 12 if you're a good team. And with basketball, it's 40, maybe 50. And with baseball, the Mariners, look at the Mariners, right? So they play maybe, 80 games at home, and they're never going to go to the playoffs, so let's just forget about any extra games. So it's really there's not enough use of the stadium to actually have a sustained economic increase in that area. And so if you're going to spend $1 billion, that Safeco Field was $700 million. They spent well over $1 billion in those two stadiums, plus the parking garage and all that. And if you drive by it at any given period, there's very unlikely you're going to see anybody there, because the vast majority of the time they are closed, right? Does it make sense to spend that kind of money on something that's only open a small fraction of the time of the year, right? So that's an offset. It's an example. But back to the Beijing examples, it was crowding out. People don't like crowds, so if you do have a baseball game going on, who's going to come to Pioneer Square and shop for antiques? I'm certain, vast majority of people are gonna say, oh, I was gonna go to Pioneer Square, but there's a baseball game there, not going there, right? Number two, in that example, if government is giving money back to individuals, let's say, think of it in terms of the basketball team and stimulating the local economy, they want to bring the basketball team and they're going to say, oh, we'll have all these millionaires and they'll be spending money in Seattle. But the reality is millionaires live in Medina, right? Millionaires don't live in Seattle. So Seattle would be giving them money. It would be called leakage is what it calls a leakage. And that's where money comes from Seattle area to pay their salaries. And then they take that money and they go over to Bellevue and they spend it on homes and fancy things over there, right? So that's an offset. And so let me talk about another increase is government will go out and try to build roads and bridges and things like that. Well, when government's doing that, it needs concrete, it needs steel, it needs things like that, and that can have a similar